Muslims for a really long time in this country have been told that there is a privilege, that we are given, and it might be taken away. But no matter how much we have tried to be the best neighbor, people have always worked on finding a way to not allow for every single civil liberty to be extended to us.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. For months now, freshman Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has been the target of right-wing vitriol over her criticism of U.S. policy toward Israel. But the attacks reached a new level of escalation this week in reaction to distorted takes on Omar's comments at a recent event hosted by the Council on American Islamic Relations. Here are Representative Omar's actual comments.
CARE was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties.
But many on the right cut not only the little phrase, that snippet, some people did something, and used that out-of-context snippet to assail the Congresswoman, with some Fox News personalities even questioning her loyalty to the United States.
Yeah, some people did something, like an unprovoked attack, killing people in the Pentagon, thousands in the Pentagon, and the Flight 93, as well as in the World Trade Center. Really? There's so few people did something? You have to wonder if she's an American first.
Wow. Rupert Murdoch's New York Post piled on with this incredibly inflammatory cover on Thursday. And then last night, Fox News superfan Donald Trump took things to a shocking new low, tweeting out a graphic video of the Twin Towers burning, interspersed with that single snippet of the Congresswoman's speech. Now, we're not going to show you that video because it really is so inflammatory. It falls into a category where most news organizations wouldn't even play it on TV. And yet it was released through the preferred public information tool of the President of the United States, making it akin to an official public statement. And many are calling Trump's tweet and that video an incitement to violence against the Congresswoman, particularly since it comes just 1 week after a self-declared Trump supporter was charged with threatening to kill Representative Omar. Joining me now is Nayyera, former State Department senior advisor and former White House senior director. Mehdi Hasan of The Intercept. Sarah Kendzior, journalist and author of The View from Flyover Country. And Tim Wise, anti-racism educator. Nayyera, I'm going to start with you. There's so much you can unpack here. The out-of-context statements and the hysteria surrounding what Representative Omar said is one piece. But the President of the United States putting out this video, which we can't even show. I mean, honestly, we have standards here. We can't even show it on television. Your thoughts?
Listen, I come from Staten Island, and we lost a lot on 9/11. We lost half of our local fire department. Of the top 10 zip codes that lost people on 9/11, Staten Island had 5 of those. I lost friends. I almost lost my father that day. He's one of those barely missed stories if he was supposed to be at a dinner or luncheon that day. And I also lost the ability to self-define what it means to be a Muslim woman in America today. And that is an indelible part of the post-9/11 history and memory of the United States. In particular for New Yorkers, those images are extremely triggering. And when Rupert Murdoch put those next to the towers falling next to Ilhan Omar's image on the cover of a newspaper that New Yorkers will see as soon as they wake up in the morning and on their morning commute, he knew what he was doing. He was triggering these reactions of fear. Republicans often talk about triggering the libs and how much snowflakes we are, but that was a use of words and language to trigger conservative and anti-Muslim sentiment. The irony is the same people who use those words for their own political gains will argue that you have to be very careful about how you use other words for Ilhan Omar, and also will then vote against on a policy forum the things that would generally benefit the victims of 9/11, the Patriot Act. They voted for that. So they will use these words entirely to their advantage while denigrating an entire population in America.
Mehdi Hasan, I want to get your thoughts, because we just spoke last week about the ways in which people give themselves license to talk about Ilhan Omar, who came from a country in which she was a refugee, is a citizen, is a congresswoman, and the way people just feel free to speak about her and even question her allegiance to the United States and claim she must have allegiance to some foreign country or some entity that has nothing to do with the United States. I just am interested to get your thoughts.
Joy, we did speak about it before, and look what happened in the space of a week. In fact, look what happened in the space of a few weeks. In West Virginia, just a few weeks ago, there was a poster in the state capitol linking Ilhan Omar to 9/11, and we all got very upset and people were outraged. Within a few weeks, the President of the United States has now made it his pinned tweet. So I'm glad you're leading the show with this story, because her life is at risk. Let's be clear here. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the Republican Party, members of Congress like Dan Crenshaw, Rupert Murdoch in the form of Fox News and the New York Post, as you showed at the start. They have all put a target on her back, wittingly or unwittingly. God forbid they're going to get her killed. There's a man who was arrested, as you mentioned last week, a Trump supporter, who said he's going to come put a bullet in her skull. In February, there was a white nationalist in the Coast Guard who was arrested with a kill list on which Ilhan Omar's name appeared, as well as MSNBC hosts. So this is very real. This is a very real threat. He's made it his pinned tweet. We need to take it very seriously. And I've got to just deal with the substance here, because we're kind of glossed. Donald Trump and the Republicans are claiming that Ilhan Omar trivialized 9/11 and spread anti-Semitic dual loyalty tropes, neither of which she actually did. But you know who did trivialize 9/11, Joy? Donald Trump, when he went on TV on 9/11 to brag about the fact that his building was now the tallest building in Lower Manhattan. You know who did spread dual loyalty tropes, Joy? Donald Trump, when he said to an audience of US Jews at the White House that Israel is your country. And when he said last weekend to a group of US Jews that Benjamin Netanyahu is your prime minister. So this is not just incitement to violence. This is not just racism. This is brazen hypocrisy and bad faith, as ever, from the far right.
Yeah, and just to make sure that no one on social media attempts to say that what Mehdi Hasan just said was something he made up, I just want to play the backup for what you just heard Mehdi Hasan talk about Donald Trump has done. First, let's play Donald Trump on 9/11, okay, on 9/11. And remember, the U.S. was not attacked by American Muslims, by Muslim members of Congress. They were attacked by mainly Saudis. And Donald Trump seems to really love that country quite well. But here he is on 9/11 doing an interview, bragging about his buildings.
You have one of the landmark buildings down in the financial district, 40 Wall Street. Did you have any damage, or did you know what's happened down there?
Well, it was an amazing phone call I made. 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan, and it was actually, before the World Trade Center, was the tallest. And then when they built the World Trade Center, it became known as the second tallest, and now it's the tallest.
And look, there's more. Let's now play the way that Donald Trump has spoken about Muslims, about this broad community of over 1 billion people, and generalized about them. Here is Donald Trump, a bit of a montage.
Look, there's something going on. The Muslims.
The Muslim community has to help us, Mika. They're not helping us. The Muslim community is not reporting what's going on.
The Muslims have to work with us. They have to work with us. They know what's going on. We have to look at the Muslims, and we have to do something. We cannot stand by and be the stupid people while our country is destroyed. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
I'm going to let all of my panelists in, but I just want to first get Mehdi and Nayyera to just respond. How, when American Muslims hear their president speaking that way, what is the response? What is the reaction? What is the level of fear that creates? I'll start with Mehdi.
I mean, Joy, it's less than a month since 50 Muslims were gunned down, massacred by a white nationalist in New Zealand. Words matter. The constant demonization, delegitimization, the constant obsession with Muslims is leading to deaths, is leading to attacks, is leading to harassment. As I watched that montage, Joy, I just kept thinking in my head, imagine if you were saying Jews at every point there. Imagine if you were saying Jews, 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 we've got to look at the Jews. We would be rightly up in arms saying, this is crazy, this man is out of control. And yet he gets away with it for year after year after year, and it's only getting worse. You now have the most visible Muslim woman in Congress. She's not just a Muslim woman in Congress, she's a visible. With the headscarf, we know that this bothers a lot of people, and he knows what he's doing when he pins a tweet attacking America's first headscarf-wearing Muslim in this very personal and outrageous way, and it does fill communities with fear. I'm married, I've got kids, I'm living in the U.S. It's concerning, to say the very least.
And it's right. I mean, my producer of our podcast that I do wears a hijab. I worry about her. I do. I worry about, because the targeting for somebody who wears the hijab or who wears the headscarf is more easily to do.
Yes.
And I can't imagine how it feels inside the community to hear that.
Your women who wear the headscarf are visibly Muslim, and others of us who don't are not, but we all deal with this as a community in terms of how are you going to raise your children, what do you want to see put out in the world. It has forced Muslims to really reckon with what it means to be part of American society, and in fact, I think, has had Muslims stand up for other people's civil liberties rights, become engaged in their community circles, and many people, unfortunately, have been forced to be advocates when they would prefer to just be living their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And this is the difference of what it means to be Muslim in America versus what Donald Trump identifies as Muslim. He will make friendship with Saudis and governments overseas that are killing Muslims every single day in their own countries, rather than embracing the fact that many people, like myself, are part of American fabric and trying to advance American national security.
Yeah, let's broaden this out a little bit. I want to bring Tim Wise in. You're an anti-racism educator. This is what you do for a living. And this works, obviously, at some level among Trump's base. But I want to go to the broader issue of the other side, the Democratic Party, because you've had some criticism of the strength of the response on the Democratic side in defense of this young woman who's very vulnerable. She's a woman. She's a member of Congress. She's very visible. She's a target. And there's been there have been a lot of tweets, responding to this. You had Mayor Buttigieg talk about living overseas, risking his life, struggling against terrorism, and talking about that, saying the tweet made America smaller. You've had Elizabeth Warren talking about inciting violence against a sitting congresswoman. There's been some criticism that some of the responses by Democrats have not been forceful enough. AOC, who's a fellow freshman member, said members of Congress have a duty to respond to the president's explicit attack today. Ilhan Omar's life is in danger. For my colleagues to be silent is to be complicit. And some people criticizing that some of the responses haven't even included her name. What do you make of this, Tim?
Right. Well, it's not enough to criticize Donald Trump's mean tweets and bigoted tweets. We have to go back to the fundamental truth of the full context of the statement that she was making, for which she's now being attacked. The point she was making is you have some folks who are Muslim who do something, and then everybody gets blamed. And that is a fundamentally important point that people need to be not only explaining and defending, but admitting that that is true. I mean, imagine for a minute that a congressperson had tried to make the very reasonable point that we ought not judge all Christians by the fact that people who call themselves Christian have bombed or burned about 200 abortion clinics or family planning centers in the last 25 years in North America, the U.S. and Canada combined, or that people who claim that they're Christian have assassinated and murdered abortion providers and family planning doctors. If someone were to make the point, hey, don't judge all of us by the acts of some, and then a Democratic president were to tweet out, oh my God, they're minimizing abortion clinic bombings, we would all be rightly horrified, because it isn't right to judge an entire community by the acts of a handful. We're talking about 19 Muslims who were involved in 9/11, as you pointed out earlier, mostly Saudis. There were at that time 1.5 billion Muslims on planet Earth. That is the walking, talking definition of statistical sampling error. And I expect the Democratic Party to stand up and not only condemn the president, which is easy politics, but to actually talk about the truth of what the representative was discussing. She was talking about the unjustifiable scapegoating of an entire group of people, 1.5 billion strong across the planet. That is unconscionable, and that's what anyone who wants to be president ought to be talking about. And
Sarah Kendzior, adding to that, this works, though, with a lot of Donald Trump's base. Islamophobia is a very potent weapon in his arsenal. What does it mean when that weapon is being wielded by the president of the United States?
I mean, it's extraordinarily dangerous.
Hey, and what we need to be doing is what all the other panelists are saying, which is stand up for Ilhan Omar, stand up for Muslims who are being targeted, who are being discriminated against, because the goal is inciting violence. Everything that Ilhan Omar was complaining about in that speech has bore out in reality. She said that all Muslims are being discriminated against because of the actions of a few. Then she is discriminated against in that way. She says that Muslims are being treated as terrorists. Then she is being treated as a terrorist. And she says now that she is in harm's way. And that is a prophecy that we don't want fulfilled. That is not something we want to have happen, to prove that she's serious, to prove that Muslims are actually in danger. And so it is the obligation of everyone in Congress to stand up for her, and the obligation of every American to stand up for her in this case, whether you like her or not, because this is completely inappropriate. This is very dangerous, and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah. Is there a way to work away from this kind of phobia, Tim? I don't know what else to call it.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. You know, I think it requires people of conscience and politicians of conscience and media talking heads and pundits to speak very clearly and forcefully. And I think the point about not necessarily having to agree with the representative to do that is a very important one. You don't have to like her politics. You don't have to be a Democrat. You certainly don't have to be a liberal or a progressive. What you have to be is somebody who believes in any kind of even remotely democratic republic and a process whereby we can have rational conversations about public policy without blaming and scapegoating entire communities for the actions of a few. And if you can't do that, you have no right being somebody making policy in this country.
Indeed. I want to give Nayyera the last word. You worked in the State Department. How does, I mean, around the world, we've been talking for years about incitement, about what it does, because it doesn't just impact the communities here. This impacts Muslim communities around the world. The American president is doing it.
And I would say our diplomats and our military folks have a far more nuanced understanding of what it means to be Muslim in this world and working with communities, because they're on the front lines of all of these efforts to counter violent extremism. Let's not forget also that Ilhan Omar is not just Muslim. She is a black woman. She's a refugee. She represents all these marginalized communities in the United States and brings all of that to bear when she's forceful. And that's threatening to many people. That's part of what we need to be unpacking as Americans, which overseas, it's not even an issue.
Yeah, and actual, you know, white nationalism and extremism, Donald Trump never talks about that. Like, he doesn't talk about that.
Which we now know is actually the greatest threat facing Americans. And that's the challenge of when people put 9/11 in their mouths and start using it for political purpose. It ignores exactly the threat we're dealing with right now, which is right-wing terror.
Yeah, indeed. Nayyera Haq, Mehdi, thank you very much, Nayyera. Mehdi, Sarah, and Tim will be back in our next hour. We'll have much